Human Freedom Rests on Gold Redeemable Money by the Honorable Howard Buffett, U.S. Congressman from Nebraska. Reprinted from the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, May 6, 1948. Is there a connection between human freedom and gold redeemable money? At first glance, it would seem that money belongs to the world of economics and human freedom to the political sphere. But when you recall that one of the first moves by Lenin, Mussolini, and Hitler was to outlaw individual ownership of gold, you begin to sense that there may be some connection between money, redeemable in gold, and the rare prize known as human freedom. It was actually liberty. I'm sorry. Also, when you find that Lenin declared and demonstrated that a sure way to overturn the existing social order and bring about communism was by printing press paper money, then again you were impressed with the possibility of a relationship between a gold-backed money and human freedom. In that case, then certainly you and I as Americans should know the connection. We must find it, even if the money is difficult and tricky of a subject. I suppose that if most people were asked their views on money, the almost universal answer would be that they did not have enough of it. In a free country, the monetary unit rests upon a fixed foundation of gold, or gold and silver independent of ruling politicians. Our dollar was that kind of money before 1933. Under that system, paper money was redeemable for a certain weight of gold and the free option and choice of the holder of paper money. Redemption right ensures stability. That redemption right gives money a large degree of stability. The owner of such gold redeemable currency is economic independence. He can move around either within or without his country because his money holdings have accepted value anywhere. For example, I hold here what is called a $20 gold piece. Before 1933, if you possessed paper money, you could exchange it at your option for gold coin. This gold coin has a recognizable and definite value all over the world. It does so today. In most countries of the world, this gold piece, if you have enough of them, will give you much independence. But today, the ownership of such gold pieces as money in this country, Russia, and all divers other places is outlawed. And I think that that was a slight on the United States. I think that he was comparing the U.S. to Russia in 1948. I'll quit with the commentary. The subject of a Hitler or a Stalin is a serf by mere fact that his money can be called in and depreciated at the whim of his rulers. That actually happened in Russia a few months ago, when Russian people holding cash had to turn it in, 10 old rubles, and receive back 1 new ruble. I hold here a small packet of this second kind of money, printing press paper money, technically known as fiat money because its value is arbitrarily fixed by rulers or statute. The amount of this money in numerals is very large. This little packet amounts to CNC 680,000 I don't know what their currency was. Chinese money, 680,000. It cost me $5 at the regular exchange rate. I understand I got clipped on the deal. I should have gotten $2.5 million if I had purchased in the black market. But you can readily see that this Chinese money, which is a fine grade of paper money, gives the individual who owns it no independence because it has no redemptive value. Under such conditions, the individual citizen is deprived of the freedom of movement. He is prevented from laying upon purchasing power for the future. He becomes dependent upon the goodwill of politicians for his daily bread. Unless he lives on the land that will sustain him, freedom for him does not exist. You have heard a lot of oratory on inflation from politicians in both parties. Actually, that oratory and inflation maneuvering around here mostly sly efforts designed to lay blame on the other party's doorstep. All of our politicians regularly announce their intention to stop inflation. I believe I can show that until they move to restore your right to own gold, that this talk is hogwash. Paper systems end in collapse. But first, let me clear away a bit of underbrush. I will not take time to review the history of paper money experiments. So far as I can discover, paper money systems have always wound up with the collapse and economic chaos. Here, somebody might like to interrupt and ask if we're not now on the gold standard. That is true, internationally, but not domestically. Even though there is a lot of gold buried down at Fort Knox, that gold is not subject to demand by American citizens. It could all be shipped out of this country without the people having any chance to prevent it. That is not probable in the near future, for a small trickle of gold is still coming in, but it could happen in the future. This gold is temporarily and theoretically a partial security of our paper currency. But in reality, it is not. Also, currently, we are enjoying a large surplus in tax revenues, but this happy condition is only a phenomenon of post-war inflation and our global WPA. WPA. It cannot be relied upon as an accurate gauge of our financial condition, so we should disregard the current flush treasury in considering this problem. From 1930 to 1946, your government went into the red every year and the debt steadily mounted. Various plans have been proposed to reverse this spiral of debt. One is that a fixed amount of tax revenue each year would go for debt reduction. Another is that Congress would be prohibited by statute from appropriating more than the anticipated revenues in peacetime. Still another is that 10% of the taxes be set aside each year for debt reduction. All of these proposals look great, but they are unrealistic under our paper money system. They will not stand against post-war spending pressures. The accuracy of this conclusion has already been demonstrated. The budget and paper money. Under the Streamlining Act passed by Congress in 1946, the Senate and the House were required to fix the maximum budget each year. In 1947, the Senate and the House could not reach an agreement on this maximum budget, so that law was ignored. On March 4th this year, the House and Senate, so we're talking about 1948, on March 4th, 1948, the House and Senate agreed on a budget of $37.5 billion. Appropriations already passed or on the docket will most certainly take expenditures past the $40 billion mark. The statute providing for the maximum budget has fallen by the wayside even in the first 2 years it has been operating and in the period of prosperity. Ouch. There is only one way that these spending pressures can be halted, and that is to restore the final and public spending to the producers of the nation. The producers of wealth, taxpayers, must regain their right to obtain gold in exchange for the fruits of their labor. This restitution would give the people the final say-so on government spending, and would enable wealth producers to control the issuance of paper money and bonds. I do not ask you to accept this condition outright, but if you look for political facts of life, I think that you would agree that this action is only a genuine cure. There is a parallel between business and politics, which quickly illustrates the weakness in political control of money. Each of you is in business to make profits. If your firm doesn't make profits, it goes out of business. If I were to bring a product to you and say, this item is splendid for your consumers, but you'd have to sell it without profit or even at a loss, you would quickly put you out of business. Well, I would get thrown out of your office, perhaps politely, but certainly quickly. Your business must have profits. In politics, votes have similar vital importance to an elected official. That situation is not ideal, but if it exists, probably generally no one gives up power willingly. Perhaps you are right now saying to yourself, quote, "That's just what I've always thought. The politicians are thinking of our votes when they ought to think about the future of the country. What we need is Congress with some, quote, guts. If we elected a Congress with intestinal fortitude, it would stop the spending all right," end quote. I went to Washington with exactly the hope in that belief. But I had to discard it as unrealistic. Why? Because an economy congressman under our printing press money system is in the position of a fireman running into a burning building with a hose that's not connected to a water plug. His courage may be commendable, but he is not hooked up right at the other end of the line. So it is now with the congressman working for the economy. There is no sustained hookup with the taxpayers to give him strength. When the people's right to restrain public spending by demanding gold coin was taken from them, the automatic flow of strength from the grassroots to enforce economy in Washington was disconnected. I'll come back to this later. In January, you heard the president's message. Who was that? That must have been Truman. Where is Harry Truman? He's dead in the ground. He's dead in the ground. In January, you heard the president's message to Congress, or at least you heard about it. It made Harry Hopkins, in memory, look like old Scrooge himself. The president's State of the Union message was a, quote, pie in the sky for everyone except business. The promises were to be expected under our paper currency system. Why? Because his continuance in office depends on pleasing the majority of the pressure groups. But before you judge Harry Truman too harshly for that performance, let us speculate on his thinking. Certainly he can persuade himself that the Republicans would do the same if they were in power. Already he has characterized our talk of the economy as, quote, just conversation. To date, we have been proving him right. Neither the president nor the Republican Congress is under real compulsion to cut federal spending. And so neither one does, and the people are largely helpless. But it was not always this way. Before 1933, the people themselves had an effective way to a demand economy. Before 1933, whenever the people became disturbed over federal spending, they could go to the banks. They could redeem their paper currency in gold and wait for common sense to return to Washington. Raids on Treasury. That happened on various occasions and conditions, sometimes strained, but nothing occurred like the ultimate consequences of paper money inflation. Today, Congress is constantly besieged by minority groups seeking benefits from the public treasury. Often these groups control enough votes in many congressional districts to change the outcome of elections. Wow. And so congressmen find it difficult to persuade themselves not to give in to pressure groups. With no bad immediate consequences, it becomes expedient to accede to spending demand. The Treasury is seemingly exhaustible. Besides, the unorganized taxpayers back home may not be able to notice this expenditure. And so it goes. Let's take a quick look at just payroll pressure elements. On June 30th, 1932, there were 2.2 million people receiving monthly paychecks from the federal treasury. 15 years later, in 1947, this number had ballooned to 14.4. It had risen from 2.2 million to 14.4 million in only 15 years. This 14.5 million figure does not include about 2 million receiving either unemployment benefits or soil conservation checks. I'd love to know what that is. Holy shit. What is a soil conservation check? However, it includes about 2 million GIs getting schooling or on-the-job training. Excluding them, the total is 12.5 million, or 500% more than it was in 1932. If each beneficiary is accounted for 4 votes and only half exhibited this payroll allegiance response, the group would have accounted for 25 million votes, almost by itself, enough votes to win any national election. And just for reference, Joe Biden got 81 million votes. They're talking about 25 million votes. Almost by itself, enough votes to win any national election. They've experienced inflation. Besides these direct payroll voters, there are a large number of state, county, and local employees whose compensation in part comes from federal subsidies or grants and aid. There are many other kinds of pressure groups. There are businesses that are being enriched by national defense spending and foreign handouts. These firms, because of the money that they can spend on propaganda, may be the most dangerous of all. If the Marshall Plan meant $100 million worth of profitable business for your firm, wouldn't you invest a few thousand or so to successfully propagandize for the Marshall Plan? And if you were a foreign government getting billions, perhaps could you motherfucker. And if you were a foreign government getting billions, perhaps could you persuade a few prospective suppliers here and there to lend a hand in putting that deal through Congress? Taxpayer, the forgotten man. Far away from Congress is the real forgotten man, the taxpayer who foots the bill. He is in a different spot from the tax eater or the business that makes millions from spending schemes. He cannot afford to spend his time trying to oppose federal expenditures. He has to earn his own living, and he has to carry the burden of taxes as well. But for most beneficiaries of federal paychecks, soon becomes vital in his life. He usually will spend his full energies if necessary to hang on to this income. The taxpayer is completely outmatched in such an unequal contest. Always heretofore, he possessed an equalizer. If government finances weren't run according to his idea of soundness, he had an individual right to protect himself by obtaining gold. With the restoration of the gold standard, Congress would have to again resist handouts. That would work this way. If Congress seemed receptive to reckless spending schemes, depositors' demands over the country for gold would soon become serious. That alarm in turn would quickly be reflected in all the halls of Congress. The legislators would learn from the banks back home, from the Treasury officials, that confidence in the Treasury was endangered. Congress would be forced. Who's the Treasury Secretary? Janet Yellen. Yeah, Jerome Powell's the Fed. Congress would be forced to confront spending demand with firmness. The gold standard acted as a silent watchdog to prevent unlimited public spending. I have only briefly outlined the inability of Congress to resist spending pressures during periods of prosperity. What Congress would do when a depression comes is a question I leave to your imagination. I have not time to portray the end of the road of all paper money experiments. It's worse than just the high prices that you've heard about. Monetary chaos was followed in Germany by a Hitler, in Russia by an all-out Bolshevism, and in other nations by more or less tyranny. It can take a nation to communism without external influences. Suppose the frugal savings of humble people of America continue to deteriorate in the next 10 years, as so they have in the past 10 years. Some say the people will almost certainly flock to a, quote, man on a horseback, who says he will stop inflation by price fixing, wage fixing, and rationing. When the currency loses its exchange value, the processes of production and distribution are demoralized. For example, we still have rent fixing, and rental housing remains a desperate situation. And this is 1948. Wow. For a long time, shrewd people have been quietly hoarding tangibles in one way or another. Eventually, this individual movement into tangibles will become a generational stampede unless corrective action comes soon. Is time propitious? Most opponents of free coinage of gold admit that restoration is essential, but claim that the time is not propitious. Some argue that there would be a scramble for gold, and our enormous gold resources would soon be exhausted. Actually, this argument simply points out the case. And then this is Warren's thesis. Actually, this argument simply points up the case. If there is so little confidence in our currency that restoration of gold coin would cause our gold stocks to disappear, then we must act promptly. The danger was recently highlighted by Mr. Alan Sproul, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who said, quote, "Without the support of the Federal Reserve System, and under present conditions, almost any sale of government bonds undertaken for whatever purpose, laudable or otherwise, would likely find an almost bottomless market on the first day that support was withdrawn." Our finances will never be brought into order until Congress is compelled to do so. Making our money redeemable in gold will create this compulsion. The paper money disease has been a pleasant habit thus far and will not be dropped. There's a typo. He said he dropped. Let me start again. I'm sorry. The paper money disease has been a pleasant habit thus far and will not be dropped voluntarily any more than a dope user will without a struggle give up their narcotics. But in each case, the end of the road is not a desirable prospect. I can find zero evidence to support a hope that fiat money venture will fare better ultimately than such experiments in other lands. Because of our economic strength, the paper money disease here may take many years to run its course. But we can be approaching the critical stage. When that day arrives, our political rulers will probably find that foreign war and ruthless regimentation is the cunning alternative to domestic strife. That was the way out for the paper money economy of Hitler and others. Invoking Hitler 3 paragraphs before the end. My fuck. In these remarks, I have only touched on the high points of this problem. I hope that I have given you enough information to challenge you to make a serious study of it. I warn you that politicians of both parties will oppose the restoration of gold, although they may outwardly seemingly favor it. Although these elements here and abroad, who are only getting rich from the continued American inflation, will oppose a return to sound money. You must be prepared to meet their opposition intelligently and vigorously. They have had 15 years of unbroken victory. This was 1948. They've had 90 years of unbroken victory. 93 years. But unless you are willing to surrender your children and your country to galloping inflation, war, and slavery, then this cause demands your support. For if human liberty is to survive in America, we must win the battle to restore honest money. There is no more important challenge facing us than this issue, the restoration of your freedom to secure gold in exchange for the fruits of your labor. Fiend.